policy then of the Minneapolis Police Department in handling persons in crisis, if we could look at section 3 of the policy, would be the next page, highlight Roman 3. Okay, in accordance with the Minneapolis Police Departmental policy, what are the officers supposed to do? How are they supposed to handle encounters with individuals who are experiencing a crisis?
We really want to, again, we want to meet people where they are. We want to bring our values, and our principles to those situations. We recognize that oftentimes people who are experiencing crisis, it is not something that they brought on themselves, but they're dealing with. And so there's a sense of dignity and respect that we should be honoring when we come to those calls. And so, as it's mentioned here, the values of protection, safety, and sanctity of life. Oftentimes, again, we are that first face of government that they're going to see. That may be 3 o'clock in the morning. And so we have to wear many hats, but we want to be respectful in that care that we're trying to provide for that individual.
And sometimes persons might be experiencing some sort of a breakdown that, maybe they did partially bring upon themselves. Is that right?
That is correct.
And are those people still entitled to be treated in accordance with MPD policy?
Yes, they are.
And this policy, again, is imparted in training at the training center by that group. Is that right?
That is correct.
All right. Now, I'd like to, if you could take that down, please, talk to you a little bit about officers' role as first responders in terms of providing basic medical care. All right? And so, with that, can you tell the jury, are Minneapolis police officers trained to provide basic medical care?
Yes, we are.
Hey, can you please describe what level? I'm aware there are various different levels of medical care that someone could be trained in.
So most of department members will have at least basic training in terms of first responder, the ABCs, airway, breathing, circulation, the effects of applying direct pressure on wounds to stop bleeding. Many of the things that we will respond to, perhaps just because we're closer to a call than perhaps our EMS or our fire before they get there, and they obviously have a higher degree level of training, but the training that we have and that we receive, it's very vital because those seconds are vital. Our officers carry tourniquets. We respond to situations where members in our community will have gunshot wounds. And matter of fact, a couple of my officers a couple of weeks ago saved a young man who was shot in the femur and was bleeding profusely, but because they got there quickly, knew how to apply that tourniquet. Those are some of the basics. Baby not breathing calls. Our officers have saved the lives of children who've choked or what have you because they've applied or they've been able to help start emergency breathing for them. So those are some of the basic types of first aid that are chest compressions. Those types of basic first aid. Yes.
And are officers then, specifically trained at the training center to provide this basic sort of first aid?
That is correct.
And does the Minneapolis Police Department have a policy regarding any duty that an officer would have to apply that training to a real-life situation?
Yes. We recognize, again, I mentioned that we are oftentimes going to be the first ones to respond to someone who needs medical attention, and so we absolutely have a duty to render that aid.
And that, of course, is in the Policy and Procedure Manual, is that right?
Yes.
If I can display Exhibit 230, which is MPD Policy 7-350. Emergency Medical Response. And under Roman 1, you see that the purpose of the policy is to lay out in writing the roles and responsibilities of Minneapolis Police Department employees in incidents involving a medical emergency. Is that right?
Yes.
If we could take a look at the policy itself under Roman 2, does that explain what a Minneapolis police officer is supposed to do when they come upon a medical emergency or a medical emergency develops on a call?
Yes.
Right? What are they supposed to do?
While awaiting EMS, MPD employees assisting an individual having an acute medical crisis shall provide any necessary first aid consistent with our MPD training as soon as practical.
And so then that presumes, of course, they're waiting for EMS or waiting for some kind of emergency services. Is that right?
That is correct.
So would it be fair to say that this policy then is in two parts? The officer has to request EMS or an ambulance, correct?
Yes.
And while waiting for the ambulance, they have to provide, they're required to provide what medical training and skills they have to attempt to save the person.
That is correct.
Are Minneapolis police officers provided naloxone or Narcan kits?
Yes, we are.
What are those?
It is basically a inhaler for community members who we may respond to have overdosed. It is to, if they've overdosed and are out, it is to give them that inhaler injection so that they can hopefully come to. And so it was a few years ago where, for the most part, our Minneapolis Fire Department were the ones that responded to overdose and carried the Narcan. Unfortunately, in our cities across the country saw an uptick in heroin and opioid overdoses. We had to make sure that we were, again, because we were oftentimes the first ones to come across these situations, we wanted to make sure that we were in service to our communities and making sure that if we could save lives, that we were equipping our folks with Narcan.
And a policy developed as a result of this, is that right?
That is correct.
If I can show you Exhibit 229, it's published that. Is this the Narcan policy 7-348?
That is correct, yes.
And our officers provided training in the administration of Narcan?
Yes.
Under appropriate circumstances?
Yes.
Okay. And now I'd like to talk to you a little bit about the use of force. Does Minneapolis have a written policy governing proper and authorized use of force?
Yes, we do.
Okay. And is this generally covered in the 5-300 series of the Policy and Procedure Manual?
Yes, it is.
I'd like to discuss some of that manual with you and the policy with you at this time. If we could pull and display Exhibit 216. Under the purpose of the policy, which is 5-301, can you please read the first sentence under subparagraph A?
Yes. Sanctity of life and the protection of the public shall be the cornerstones of the MPD's use of force policy.
What does that mean?
Of all the things that we do as peace officers for the Minneapolis Police Department,